We're going to resume and move into our featured panel, Global Collaboration to Fuel Ethical Innovation. And we're so very pleased to have terrific guests here. And I'm going to turn things over to the moderator of this panel, Sherri Greenberg, who is the chair-elect of Good Systems and also the Assistant Dean for State and Local Government Engagement at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. So, Sherri.
Thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you for really getting us started with that inspirational panel, and thank you, Doctor, to your tremendous presentation, and I think that it was such a good introduction for the conversation that we're going to have. And I say conversation, we will not have any slides, we're actually going to have a conversation, yes indeed. And also thank you, Sharon, and I really want to thank you and the leadership team of Good Systems and all the staff for all the work that you've been doing this year to, I think, set us on such a good course going forward next year when I'll be chair-elect. So I'm also, besides Assistant Dean for State and Local Government Engagement at LBJ School, I'm a professor of practice and also a professor of practice in the School of Social Work. And I did notice, Doctor, in your presentation, some aspects that would certainly apply to that realm. So thank you very much. I am just thrilled to have this incredible group of panelists, some who have traveled very far to be with us today, all working at the global level to discuss the importance of cross-sector interdisciplinary collaboration, which of course is what Good Systems is all about, when it comes to ensuring that AI is beneficial for everyone. When taking a global grand challenge like embedding ethics in AI and talking about that, it requires diverse participation at all scales, including globally. And I'll start by introducing our panelists. You can find their full bios in our program, and then we'll launch into a conversation that I truly believe could go on for days, but we're going to limit it to 45 minutes so that we allow some time for what I know will be your very interesting and challenging questions. So with us today, we have Dr. Christine Custis. She is the Director of Programs and Research at the Partnership in AI, where her work focuses on managing PAI's portfolio of research and programs, ensuring coordination of program pilots and outputs, and delivering measurable results that align with our theory of change. This includes holding timely convenings on emerging international challenges, conducting research, synthesis, and analysis to develop accessible resources, tools, and recommendations on specific areas of programming for PAI, and promoting adoption of best practices with partners. She engages collaboratively and consultatively with our global community of partners, PAI's board of directors, and individuals across PAI's international organization. Dr. Custis is also an associate professor at Shenandoah University in the School of Business, where she teaches and conducts research on how enterprises should use information systems and technology to innovate and achieve organizational goals. Welcome, and thank you for being with us. Dr. Kate Devlin is the Director of Advocacy and Engagement at the UKRI Trustworthy Autonomous Systems Task Hub, we shall call it, a collaborative platform to enable the development of socially beneficial robotics and AI systems that are both trustworthy in principle and trusted in practice. And she is a reader in Artificial Intelligence and Society in the Department of Digital Humanities, King's College, London, UK. With an undergraduate degree in archaeology and MSc and PhD in computer science, her research investigates how people interact with and react to technologies, both past and future. Dr. Devlin is the author of the critically acclaimed Turned On, Science, Sex, and Robots, Bloomsbury 2018, you can look it up, which examines the ethical and social implications of technology and intimacy. Dr. Devlin is a board member of the Open Rights Group, a UK-based organization that works to preserve digital rights and freedoms, and is a campaigner for gender equality to improve opportunities for women in tech. In 2022, she was appointed as a patron of Humanitas UK for her contribution to the greater public understanding of science. Welcome. And we have Kay Firth-Butterfield. She is head of artificial intelligence and a member of the executive committee of the World Economic Forum. Actually, she was, right? Didn't that change just as of today?
That changed as of 9 o'clock this morning.
So as of 9 o'clock this morning, what are you doing?
As of 9 o'clock this morning, I am the CEO of the Center for Trustworthy Technology. And I haven't moved a long way from the forum because the center is actually a revolution, which means that we have a very good collaboration with the World Economic Forum, but also, which is the fun news, because I'm on the board, on the advisory board of the College of Natural Sciences here at University of Texas and used to teach here. We are based. I'm really looking forward to working with a lot of you and the Good Systems project as we move forward.
So thank you, Kay, for providing that context, right, for really your work and what it means for this discussion. So I would ask our other panelists, too, please spend a couple of minutes, Christine, we'll start with you, to provide us some context for what you're doing and how that interfaces with our conversation today.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much to the lovely folks who put this on, who organized it. I know there's a lot that goes into putting these events together, so thank you so much. I'm from the Partnership on AI, and we are a nonprofit, and we are concerned with how the development, deployment, and even design of AI systems impacts people and society. So just a real quick history, probably about 6 years ago, a couple of folks for some of the big technology companies got together and they said, you know what, we are all going to be facing a lot of the same ethical issues. So it'd be great if we had an objective space to have these conversations about what it means to be responsible in the design, development, and deployment of AI. And so that's really the origin of the Partnership on AI, is to be the convener of these different voices, whether it's tech companies or civil society organizations, media companies, startups, advocacy groups, just getting all those voices in the space so that we can have what our keynote speaker spoke of earlier, which is participatory research and design, that inclusive and equitable approach to doing this work. So that's what we're all about, and we have several program areas that we focus on. I'm happy to talk about those as we get into our conversation today, but thanks again for having me.
Wonderful, thank you. Kate?
Hi, so thanks again, for having me here. I'm in the Trustworthy Autonomous Systems Hub, TAS Hub. We are very much similar to Good Systems in our remit. We've put together a program that investigates the responsible and ethical challenges there are in developing technology. We are a consortium of 3 universities, mine, which is King's College London, and also the University of Southampton and the University of Nottingham. And then that's expanded out with a number of different nodes that look at different aspects like resilience, governance, trust. There's 6 of those nodes as well. And then we have over 100 industry partners as well. And we're funded by UK government on a sort of large grant that lasts for 4 years. So we're in the final year and a half of our funding now. So our work is to carry out research, but also to fund research to anyone in the UK community, and also to form collaborations worldwide, which is how we ended up collaborating and partnering with Good Systems and also with Johns Hopkins as well, because those are the 2 really natural alliances we find where the emphasis was very, very similar to what we want to do, which is how can we go forward with responsible development embedded in everything we do. So while we're interested in progressing the research, that can only be done, in our view, if it's done responsibly, with set, clear guidelines, with equality, diversity initiatives and inclusiveness initiatives embedded into the heart of that. So everything we do, everything we fund, we carry it out with responsible research and innovation at the core. And so we're always looking for people to sort of further that as well.
Thank you. And Kay, I I know you talked about the context of your new position, but I didn't have the opportunity to tell people about your amazing background. So she is a barrister, former judge and professor, technologist, and entrepreneur who has an abiding interest in how humanity can equitably benefit from new technologies, especially AI. She is an associate barrister, master of the Inter Temple London, and served on the Lord Chief Justice's advisory panel on AI in law. She co-founded the Responsible AI Institute and was one of the world's first chief AI ethics officers in 2014, correct? She is a vice chair of the IEEE Global Initiative for Ethical Considerations in Artificial Intelligence and Autonomous Systems, and was part of the group which met at Asilomar to create the Asilomar AI Ethical Principles. She's on the Polaris Council for the Government Accountability Office in the USA, the Advisory Board for UNESCO International Research Center on AI, Earth Species, and she has advanced degrees in law and international relations. So thank you, and we are certainly blessed to have you back here in Texas, right? I would like to start by asking each of you to address really the foundational question for our panel, which is, why is it important to seek out global interdisciplinary collaborations when it comes to embedding ethics in AI? And what can we achieve together that we can't achieve apart? So we'll start here.
I think, if anything, the past few weeks has shown just the sheer scale of the way things are moving, and bring up the letter already, but with the letter coming out about large language models and just the different viewpoints that have arisen and the kind of polarization of those arguments on social media really shows how much we need to have this conversation. This is something that's impacting, no matter, so the very technocratic basis that AI currently has, where the bulk of the developments are coming out of Silicon Valley, but they're not, it's not equally affecting different parts of the world. There are people who are heavily impacted. There are people who have a big say in that. We need to be working together to try and make sure that this is much more equitable than it is. It's becoming more and more obvious how all those things are having an impact. The global south is being almost entirely left out of the conversation. There's different approaches to regulation between the EU, who are steps ahead, but also quite constrictive. The UK, who've just published their white paper on how they want to regulate, but it's still kind of missing bits. And then the US, where there's not really any regulation in play, but this is more Kay's area than mine. So I think it really shows just how widespread, how scalable, how quickly things are taking hold. And if we don't have those global conversations, we're going to be really missing out.
So Kay, again, why is it important to seek out global interdisciplinary collaborations when it comes to embedding ethics in AI, and what can we achieve together that we can't apart?
Yes, certainly. So +1 to everything that Kate said. But let me just start with this global conversation. We aren't having a global conversation. We aren't having a conversation really beyond Europe and America. China's having a conversation all by itself. And there are still 3 billion people without the internet. They're not part of this conversation. We are designing with artificial intelligence solutions for people in the global south without inviting them into the conversation. I was in a conversation the other day with a cardiologist who said, most of our trials are on white guys over 55. Well, we could extrapolate that to how's that going to be useful for us women, people of color in America, in Rwanda, in Brazil, etc. We are in danger. Well, we have already, if you look at the map of data, swamped the rest of the world with data. So America's sort of pregnant with it. Europe's got a lot of it. Poor old South America and Africa look as if they're starving. And so unless we have truly global conversations, all the things that we talk about are really only useful for those of us who are in America and Europe. And that, to me, misses the true benefits of artificial intelligence and robotics and all the great things that we can do using these technologies. So we're better together because we will produce a better, more equal society across the world.
Christine, same question for you. Why is it important to seek out global interdisciplinary collaborations when it comes to embedding ethics in AI? And what can we achieve together that we cannot achieve apart?
Absolutely, and I just love that. I love the way you frame that. It's true. We're talking to ourselves, right? This echo chamber. You know, I would bring it back to, because you're computer scientists and engineers and software developers, right? So you understand stage gates, you understand milestones, requirements, but I'll just bring it back to design thinking. If you've ever gone into a restroom and wondered why the faucet won't turn on for you, or if you've ever gone someplace and thought, why is that so high? You know, it doesn't really fit me. Or if you've ever just wondered about the way the world you live in doesn't seem to fit you or doesn't seem to be meant for you, it's that times 1,000. And imagine if we have all these technologies, we have this divide, this digital divide that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And these large language models, if they're primarily in English, imagine what that's doing for other languages and how that sort of continues to separate us. So we've got a lot of very wonderful challenges that we can consider in having this conversation in an equitable and inclusive way that would help us to not just create good technology, but technology for good that can actually impact us and help us and not like work against us. So I just want to plus one everything that was already said.
Thank you. Kay, and you may want to speak about this in the context of what you've done, since what you're doing now started, I believe you said at 9 a.m. this morning, but what are some different projects which your expert organization, current, past, present, we'll make it for you, are working on where cross-sector collaboration has benefited the outcome?
So until 9 o'clock this morning, I was head of the World Economic Forum, and so we have the benefit of talking to and companies to co-create what we need to create. And what we've been doing in the last 5.5 years that I've been there is actually creating frameworks. So, you know, I was at Asilomar in 2017 to create those first ethical principles. We don't need to be talking about principles anymore. We haven't needed to talk about principles for the last 5 years. I would say we have to talk about how do you operationalize those principles? And so that's what we've been doing. So to give you some examples, Interpol and UKRI and police forces around the world and civil society advocates to really think about if facial recognition technology, gait recognition technology, and others are going to be used by police forces, and it will be, how do we make that use responsible? And so that piece of work is now being used by police forces across the world voluntarily, and also, perhaps not as voluntarily, Interpol is imposing it on any questions that police forces from 192 countries around the world have of Interpol's database. And so it's really sort of moving the needle. It's not about, well, you should be good or you should not be biased. It's about helping people to work out how to do that in their jobs. Another piece of work that we did was around how do you use AI in hiring and how do you use it responsibly. And the guide that we produced is now being used by the EEOC in America as, if you use this guide, we probably won't be suing you, but we are starting to sue people. And so the other thing I wanted to talk about was fire. Wildfires are the scourge of our planet, one of the scourges of our planet at the moment. And particularly having lived in California and now living in Texas. So we have created a global coalition of governments, civil society, academics, and companies to actually tackle this. And we've now got an application that's come out of that can predict in the Mediterranean climate where a wildfire is going to start within 24 hours before it starts, so we can stop it starting at an 80% accuracy rate. That's the power of AI, and that's the power of global cooperation.
Christine, what are some projects that your organization is working on where you've had some cross-sector collaboration and you've seen some beneficial outcomes?
Absolutely. So we do have syntheticmedia.partnershiponai.org. I'll give you a quick plug. We're very proud of this launch we made about 4 weeks ago. A colleague of mine had worked on this for over a year with about 100 partners. And it's basically about synthetic media framework. This is not a code of conduct, but this is a rules of engagement. So for a platform like Bumble or TikTok, or for a software developer like Adobe or Synthesia that gives people the opportunity to make fake media, what are the rules of engagement? What are you committed to as an actor in this space? And can you give us insight on how you might show progress in following these commitments? So it's a framework, it's out there on the web, and we've encouraged people to take a look at it and review it and adopt it and try it out. But basically, it's a set of guidelines that we are using to mitigate the risks of mis and disinformation for fake media online. So this is right now in the format of images or videos, but we want it to expand to include audio and text. What do we do so that consumers are safe? How do we educate? How do we label? How do we ensure consent is provided? So lots of really great work that, again, this was an effort that we convened. It was not just the partnership on AI, but it was over 100 partners that helped to develop this framework. And although I do think we talked a little bit earlier about, in our previous panel, about the letter, right, that many of us have read, and the signatories on that letter. And I'm really excited about the idea of consensus work that is groupthink and community architected, and it belongs to the community so that it can evolve and be used by the community. So that's some work that we're really proud of, and hope that you will go out and take a look at that.
Wonderful. Kate?
The TAS Hub has funded a lot of really interesting and diverse projects, anything from evaluating assurance for mental health chatbots to diabetes care to self-driving cars and the handover period between automatic and human-driven. But the one I want to talk about, because it's cross-sectoral and also interdisciplinary, is current project that's going on involving cats. So I'm involved with this one, and I'm quite excited about it. It's called Cat Royale, and you can find it at blasttheory.co.uk. And essentially, we're working with the cultural sector, an art group called Blast Theory, and they've created a cat utopia with a robot arm. And the 3 cats that live in it, Clover, Ghostbuster, and Pumpkin. And they have everything they could possibly want in this cat utopia. They have toys that the robot arm can play with. The robot arm will give them food. And this it was commissioned by TAS Hub, and the idea was as a provocative piece to say, can robotics look after animals? And it uses the computer vision system in conjunction with the robot arm to monitor the scene and to try and come up with some kind of record of the cat's happiness. And so there's lots of questions around what it even means to measure happiness. And this experiment has been running for the past week, and we've been videoing it and saving the highlights. And those are going to go to exhibitions, including one in London that I'm going to be involved with in the Science Gallery. And when it gets there, so the group in Nottingham are working on AI in animals and how that might happen in future when you have robots and AI to care for your animals. I'm interested in perceptions of automated care. So when that comes to the gallery there, I want to be asking the viewers, is it okay for a robot to look after your cat? Because quite often we get people saying, hey, elderly care and robots, that's really cool. A robot can look after my grandparents. And then you say, okay, that's great. What about your cat? And they go, oh, no, I wouldn't trust a robot with my cat. And so, what is this perception that, the cat, and maybe it's just a very British thing, I don't know. There's lots of questions there about what's acceptable and how, what are we willing to do? Are we willing to say it's okay for, and I like the idea of assistive technology to help people when they're aging, but what is the line that people won't cross? Is it is it age? Is it species? Is it vulnerability? Why would we say it's okay for our grandparents to be cared for by robots, but not say a baby? So I'm really looking forward to gathering data from that. But that's come about through lots of cross collaboration between HCI, HRI, arts, psychology. Really fun thing to do. So yeah.
Fascinating, and it certainly does tie in with our keynote speaker, because we were discussing, and he certainly provided wonderful examples, and then we had some conversation around, assistive technology, as you said, providing care for the elderly, for someone who'd had a stroke, taking those tasks that can be actually detrimental to humans, backbreaking labor, right? With getting people out of bed and whatnot. And it occurred to me as you were just speaking that there are lots of, for instance, elderly people who have pets. But not only can they no longer care for themselves, they can't care for their pets. But of course, their dogs, let's say, you're talking about cats, but I'll use the example of dogs, because I'll admit it, I'm a dog person. Their dogs are so important to them as companions and for their mental health. So do we not only need them to have assistive care, but assistive care to assist them in now taking care of their dogs who they can no longer take care of? This is a very real scenario that is playing out right now. Today, at this moment.
And tied into that are lots of questions about who provides that care. Will the government cut funding to care if we're able to provide assistive technologies? Because then we lose even more, So there's lots of socioeconomic things tied into that as well.
Well, there is. And you bring up, will it be funded? Well, if you're, the government or an insurance company, and you actually look at the data of what having that dog means to the well-being of that elderly person, and you're, at least data informed, then that should help you make that decision. Well, speaking of governments and decisions, I wanted to ask each of you, what are some examples of how different governments are creating policies, actual policies from different governments, because we're talking globally, around AI technologies? So we'll start here again.
Okay. So I'll talk about the UK perspective. So 2 weeks ago, I think it was, the UK published a white paper on AI regulation. Now they've been kind of hedging it a bit for a while, so it was nice to finally get some kind of white paper out there, and it's been reasonably positively received. I think there are some flaws in it. They've essentially gone for a pro-innovation approach. So they've said, we're not going to go for blanket regulation. We're not going to have one regulatory body. We're not going to say this tech is allowed, this tech isn't. We're going to do it on a sector basis. And we're going to leave it up to existing regulators or put some new ones in place where it's needed. I'm a bit skeptical because regulators in the UK tend to be a little bit toothless. They tend to be, they're said that they're there and they say they have the powers, but when it comes down to it, like Information Commissioner, they have this power to hand out big fines. It doesn't really get that far. So I'm a bit dubious about how well this is going to be enforced. And I have this wonderful, I screenshotted part of the white paper because it was a subtweet to the EU, to the European Union's AI Act, where they said the government will avoid heavy-handed legislation which could stifle innovation and will take an adaptable approach to regulating AI. Instead of giving responsibility to a single regulator, it will empower existing regulators. So it's very much against the EU AI Act, which is seen as being quite draconian by comparison, because it is classing technology into you may not use this, you might be able to use this in certain circumstances, go wild with it if it's not in those two categories. So I think it's going to be really interesting. I think the UK is sitting in this middle ground between that and the US, but I think it's going to be interesting how it plays out because they're a bit behind already. They've not foreseen what's happening with large language models. They don't have anything in place to act on that yet, and they're talking about implementation in a year's time, and that's going to be too late for some of it.
And yes, I know we've all been waiting for this white paper, as you said, and you bring up certainly an excellent question, what's going to happen where the rubber meets the road? So in the United States, we have certainly had situations both at the levels of state governments, I'll take, and around the country, for instance, where we've looked at self-regulation, and it comes to mind with pollution, right, where various state governments around the United States have said, we're not going to actually regulate pollution. What we're going to do is say, if your particular plant, goes beyond certain particulates or whatever, then we're going to fine you. Well, then the question becomes, as I said, where the rubber meets the road, what are the outcomes? Is this having an outcome of diminishing particulates, or is this something where the company just figures in the fine into the cost of doing business because the fine may not be enough to counteract that? And so I think you raise a really good point. Kay, I know you've looked certainly a lot at what the EU has done in the way of governments creating policies around AI technologies.
Yes, certainly. And Kate has just sort of talked about the EU. So before I go to regulation, I just want to go back to these poor cats. Because from the cat's point of view, they really are social animals. They like to interact with us humans, and that's certainly true of dogs. So at the moment, we're depriving them of that human interaction, and I just worry about that.
Don't worry. So cat welfare officers have been involved the whole time. It's very closely monitored, and it was only for a week, and they actually preferred it to their home environment.
Really?
Because they've got these wonderful ledges they can climb up on and loads more toys than usual. They were having a blast.
There you are, you see. I always knew that cats were really just independent, and
yes,
we
it would
were
be
their
interesting.
slaves.
Yes, I would raise that question more with dogs, perhaps.
Yeah.
Anyway, so let's go to legislation. And we all know, everybody in this room must know what the EU has been up to. They've been working over the past, 2-3 years. Legislation takes so long. And then, of course, they were about to do something, and now they've all had to go back to the drawing board because of large language models. And one worries a little bit that what will happen is that something else will come out before they come out with their legislation, and we'll all be back in the drawing board. So let's look at some of the other countries around the world and America. The NIST framework, really important, but not binding. There is
Kay, the national in the United States.
Yes, the Institute of Science and Technology.
That's right.
Standards. Okay, sorry. If you want to know what America's really doing, actually, I think the governor's website helps you more, because it actually sets out what legislation that they are thinking about, what they've passed around artificial intelligence. So what are they interested in? They're interested in AI and education. We could, of course, say that actually probably the horse is already 2 fields away on that, because we can't begin now training people to be AI scientists. We can't begin now to train women so that there's that diversity in your classrooms. We have to think about or in companies, we have to actually think about a different way of including women and people of color in those product teams. So that then brings me to self-regulation, and Sherri talked about it. We have seen companies factor in the fine, even in Europe, where the fines are actually quite substantial. But in the absence of any other form of governance, we are having to ask companies to step up. companies to understand that it's around brand value. But also, as well as the big companies, and we've seen lots of layoffs in their responsible AI teams and things like that, we need to be thinking about startups. And so one of the things I think we need to be doing is educating VCs and investors, because if we could actually get investment from both ends in responsible AI only, then we could begin to crack this issue. So if we only had startups who actually had a policy about responsible AI, that's a form of self-regulation. And I think that that could be much more beneficial than asking some of the big tech companies to self-regulate, because it's hard at their level. They have lots of competing lots of competing things on their agendas. And I just want to draw your attention to that by talking about large language models. I actually am one of the people who signed the letter, and you can ask me questions about that if you want. And I know that it's very unlikely that we will have a moratorium. And why do I know that? Because I talk to a lot of businesses. And most of these businesses, their CEOs are already worried that their business is going to be lost or put in jeopardy because of large language models, and they have not one clue, a lot of them, what large language models are actually and what they can give them. But they're all in this scrabble and race and fear that their companies are going to be the codex of the past. And so, so we do need to help those companies to take a pause, take a breath, think about self-regulation, and then we can move on in a proper way and a societal acceptable way.
Great point, thank you. Christine, from your vantage point?
Yeah, fear is a good word. It is a bit of a scramble, and you probably hear as we're talking frameworks and principles and white papers and forums and blueprints, right? And so I think what I will say is that we're dealing with, as a collective, sort of the meta issues around AI before we can even get to the valuable policy propositions and regulation and compliance and monitoring. And some of those meta issues show up in, for instance, I have a couple of notes here, Japan's social principles. They have these 7 social principles, and it shows up for the regulation on AI, which is to manage the risk associated with AI, but also the regulation for AI, which is reform to promote implementation of. So we're having to operate from these various different vantage points, and you can tell government by government, entity by entity, the many ways we're trying to come at this issue. And it's complex and it's confusing. And, you know, in some organizations, some countries, like for instance in Canada, they have the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, ADA. They're more looking at ensuring that Canadians can trust the digital technologies that they use every day. So we're all sort of looking at this monstrosity, right? And we're trying to figure out what way to come at it. And I think the way we need to do it is together, because we'll all sort of figure one little piece of it out and we can share what we figure out.
So that is actually a perfect segue into the last thing that I'd like each of you to address before we go to your questions, and that is, and we'll start with you because it was the perfect segue. Okay. If you could have one call to action for all of us here today, if you could identify just one insider action you would like for us to all take away and take to heart in our work and research, what would that be? Participate.
If you are interested in monitoring, or if you are interested in the rules and how people should behave, then join meetups, get into groups with your classmates, with your colleagues. Join us at partnershiponai.org at some of our convenings and add your voice to the space, right? Because you have a lived experience that is relevant and it's important and it's missing from the conversation. So That would be my call to action. I am biased towards your participation with the partnership on AI, but even if it is not with us, I would say just get in the conversation.
Hey?
Yeah, well, I would have said participate, but I actually think educate, because, you know, we all know what we're talking about here, but I go to many meetings, and I'm sure you've already all been to dinner parties where people have said, "What? You're crazy. What are you talking about?" Our friends, our neighbors, everybody needs to understand this, because this is their children's future. This is their future if we're all going to be cared for by robots. And it's really important that we have that conversation about what do we as humans want out of this technology. It's all very well the technologists saying to us, "Oh, well, you better figure it out because we're going to keep doing it anyway." How do we as humans shape the future we want? It has to start with educating, because we have to have a full and ripe discussion.
Kate?
Question everything. Question the sources. Question what data you're getting out of things. Question who's behind it, what their motivation is. Question why something's being done. And most of all, question who's being left out, because there are many, many people that are being left out.
Well, thank you. I could not have said it better as far as the call to action. You really hit the three legs of the stool, and thank you very much for that. We want to open it up now to your questions. I see a hand right there.
So actually I have two questions. First question is about the blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights and how much it does and doesn't do. Second question is about the possibility of robots to actually be companion animals. There's an example of the Sony Aibo, which is way better than having a robot feed your cat, I think. But the downside is that Sony Aibo records everything. So if you have, let's say, a person with dementia who likes to play with their dog, but they cannot take care of the dog, right? That's fine. Having a robot take that role is better. But I worry where all the interactions that are recorded are going to end up, and who's going to see, you know, what that person with dementia told the dog or things like that. So any comments on that?
So we had two disparate questions. One is the blueprint, and the other is the ramifications of robots in care, right?
I'm happy to take ramifications of robots in care. And you too can take that. My perspective, I mean, I'm a dog and cat person. I have 6 cats and 3 dogs. So, yes. I, therefore, would not want a robotic dog, because I think that the human one, the species one, is so much more fun. But there is no doubt that we will all benefit from interactions with other things going forwards. The reason I wanted actually to take this question is not about robotic dogs, but about toys that we give our children that are AI enabled, because we've done a lot of research on this, and we actually have a competition at the forum each year, which actually is moving with me to the center, for toys that do not share your children's data. Do actual thinking very carefully about what curricula your children are getting from the toy, if it's supposed to be educational. Also toys that, if your child bonds with it, how do you deal with separation? How do you deal with toys that have facial recognition and voice recognition? And what do the owners of the toys do with all of that? So they're really important things for us to be thinking about very carefully, before we go hell for leather into creating all these new things for us to play with. And particularly, I would say, for children and older people. And so one of the frameworks that we built was actually 10 ethical principles for using AI embedded in robots with older people. But there's so much more research that needs to be done on that. And Kate's doing some of it.
But you do bring up a very, very important issue, and that is when you are dealing with people who don't have agency, right? So children are not having the ability to make these decisions, to speak up. Is the 3-year-old saying, you know, I don't think that's really a good idea to their parents. Somebody might have my data, might have facial recognition, my voice. They don't have that opportunity. And many times neither do, as you said, the elderly or people who have certain cognitive situations where they can't. So I think that's a very important issue that you surfaced, Kate.
Yeah, I think that's similarly when deception comes into it, it's problematic, definitely. But there's lots of work that's been done on looking at those bonds. It's an area of research I work on, looking at those emotional bonds that people form with artifacts and digital artifacts like robots as well. And now we're seeing more and more with AI chatbots too. And it's a very compelling effect. It goes right back to the sort of Tamagotchi effect, and the IBO is a perfect example, to the point where when the last IBOs were stopped being repaired, people were having sort of funeral services at the very end when these could no longer exist. And I find that something incredibly emotive about that people can feel that bond. But it's not surprising when given the degree of animism it has and the way that we connect to these things. So I do think that there's a space for companion robots in the form of pets or otherwise. But I'm wary, as you say, of the privacy concerns, that we could make them without the data storage. But I was talking about this with someone recently and I was saying, if you have a robot creature as a pet, you don't have to feed it, you don't have to clean up after it. And someone said, well, in that case, just invent a robot to clean up after my actual pet. And I thought, that's quite fair, actually.
I like that.
But so I do think it's interesting. And one of the areas I'm working on now is that separation thing. What happens if you have a companion robot and it's switched off, or the company goes bust, or the robot stops being used, and suddenly you've got these people who really are grieving the loss of something that meant something to them. And we've seen it with things like the Opportunity rover on Mars, where the people in NASA gathering around the screens, pretty much crying at the loss when it finally came to the end of its lifespan. So we do feel these really compelling connections, and I think that's a fascinating thing to explore.
It also evokes certain books and movies I've seen of science fiction, or are they? And what would you like to address, Christine?
Yeah, I'll take the question about the blueprint and what it does or does not accomplish. I mean, those of us who read it, we remember the very first page, right, with the legal caveats of what it was not and what it would not do. But I will say it took a really big step forward from the perspective of human-centered thinking. A Bill of Rights. These are your rights as a consumer. These are your rights to security. These are your rights to safety and privacy. So I think that just from that vantage point, looking at this very technical space from a human lens, I think it was an important opportunity. So, it can be a foundation for many things to come. And I think even with the NIST framework for, risk management, the next step will be personas and thinking about them from the perspective of the different scenarios and the different organizations and the different areas where we can use these tools. So it was a start, it was a beginning, and I'm sure it took so much to even get that name. I think it went from Bill of Rights to, blueprint for Bill of Rights, and it's just like, you just got to get something out there. So that's what I would say.
Life is a journey, and that was a beginning. That
was one of the despise not the day of small beginnings. Yes.
Question? Oh, right here, yes.
First of all, I want to say thank you all for a very stimulating, interesting talk. My question is maybe kind of directed a bit. I, like many, was intrigued by the letter that went out. And what do you know? We have one of the signers here. So this is sort of directed in that direction. I certainly agree that we have a lot of people who don't fully understand this technology kind of running around like a chicken with their head cut off, not necessarily thinking very rationally. But I also, while I fully admire the intention for deliberative thought that the letter represents, I wonder if it's ultimately the best direction to maybe be trying to guide the conversation, because I think about potential technologies with existential risks that our species has dealt with before, things like nuclear proliferation, and we've been able to prevent proliferation in that space because it is hard to make those things. It's expensive, economies of scale, easy to track, et cetera, whereas the costs of making this AI tech is collapsing to nothing. We had a Stanford team who literally recreated one of these models for $600. All you need is one human being on the planet to defect anywhere, and the stuff keeps progressing forward. So I'm almost wondering if it maybe isn't a better approach to think about legal and technical frameworks proactively to safeguard against the dangers of the bad actors, as opposed to, while I agree probably there should be some pause, I really just don't think that's going to happen, to be blunt, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I agree. As I said, I don't think it's going to happen. But why did I sign it? I signed it because somebody's got to. Somebody's actually got to wave a flag and say, hang on a moment, shouldn't we think about this? Even if nobody does. Actually, people are. The very fact that we're having this conversation about it means that people are thinking about it. Of course, we need some legislation, but legislation, I'm a lawyer by background, legislation takes forever. So that's problematic to actually do something. But if we don't have a pause, we won't have any legislation. Equally, the law itself, there are laws out there. So I mentioned the EEOC earlier. EEOC has just said, okay, we can't wait for new law. We'll just use the Civil Rights Act. And there is law out there, but again, it takes a long time. And yet the speed of this technology is so fast. As I said, there are so many people in very powerful positions like CEOs that don't understand it. And so I think the fact that we've spurred this conversation is actually the best we're going to get, but at least we've got a conversation.
And I'll echo that by saying, as someone myself who has been in the legislative and public policy arena, and I still am as in my role at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, there is, in fact, a place for introducing an issue into the realm of public discussion and a topic for public policy. And so I think that that's very important.
Just coming back on that, when does policy happen? Policy happens when there are sufficient people talking about it. At least we've got people talking about it.
Yes, and that's true. You do have to have a sufficient, more than a nucleus. At one time, someone asked me, when would the state of Texas have an income tax? And my response was, when an angry mob with pitchforks descends upon the Texas Capitol demanding.
I think there's also spurred new letters as well. So there's now a whole rash of letters that are emerging. But I think for me, there are a lot of people that signed that letter who I like and respect and find their views, and you're one of them, Kay, find their views great on this. There are others on that letter who I would not trust to use my washing machine, let alone determine my tech future. And I think what really got my back up was that, the people are going, stop using large language models immediately. And I'm looking at them going, but you created them. Why are you only seeing this now? Why are you not there at the start going, hey, maybe we shouldn't just put this out there for the public to use? So I think that was quite galling for a lot of people, that there's been the entire AI ethics community for years now has been warning against exactly this thing. And it's only when the kind of prodigal tech bros come in and say, actually, we should do something about this, we're very concerned, that everyone said, yeah, we've been saying that for so long. But you're right, it's got people talking about it, and it's got people coming up with their versions of the letters, and maybe something will get done from that. And it's also quite fun watching the debates on Twitter. So, yeah.
Well,
I think also that it's an important conversation that we have to have, and if we can do something to stop some of the people who signed the letter that Kate is talking about taking the approach of the drunk to technology. And let me widen that analogy. There are a number of people making large language models who are saying, oh, this tech could be very dangerous, but we're going to go on doing it anyway. Isn't that what the drunk says? The drunk says, oh, this is really bad for me and my family and society, but I'm going to keep doing it anyway.
well, I know that we could, as I said at the outset, this discussion, this conversation could go on for days, but we cannot because I know we've reached the end of the time for our panel. But what I would say is, please do continue this conversation. Sharon's going to tell us about what comes next, and you'll have opportunities to discuss among yourselves. And thank you to our wonderful panelists.
Thank you, Kay, Christine, Kate, and Sherri for a fantastic discussion on the importance of global collaborations and all of the issues that these collaborations can introduce and maybe in the future resolve as well. So this is a conversation I hope will all continue throughout the remainder of today and tomorrow morning. So 2 things. I'd like to invite you to join us as we wrap up with a poster session and a reception in the lobby. There is food and drink there as well. And then we'll resume tomorrow morning in a room over at the Student Activities Center. And maybe the room number is up there. It's on the 2nd floor of the Student Activities Center. So thank you all for being here and hope to see you tomorrow and a little later right now too.